Good day everyone, I'm Angelo Calderon from Group 10, and for today's discussion, our topic will revolve around arguments. Analysis of Natural Arguments, Acuña Unit 4, Modules 5, 6, and 7. Module 5, Fallacies, Counterfeit Arguments. Nowadays, people are open to various logical arguments, but some use fallacies that basically fool or distort logic. Fallacy is a flawed, deceptive, or false argument that can be proven wrong by reasoning. As a critical thinker, dapat may complete mastery tayo about the types of fallacies. Ayan. So types of fallacies, first, ad hominem or attack on person. This basically is just what it sounds like. It occurs when someone attacks a person, for example, his appearance or personality, as a way to counter an argument with irrelevant information. Example, you are having a debate about qualifications of Child Jokno. You are using facts to provide basis for his competence, but someone will just say, para mamumuno yan, sira-sira ang ngipin. So next is the ad baculum or appeal on the stake. This argument appeals to the use of force. By threatening and intimidating someone, you reject his argument. For example, pag hindi ka nag-engineer, kalimutan mo na may tatay ka. Tatapon kita sa lansangan at ipapabugbog kita sa mga tambay. So that's an example. Next type is the ad misericordiam or appeal to pity. This uses pity or self-humiliation as a counter-argument. And this is self-explanatory. For example, you're breaking up with me? Why? Am I really that stupid of a person? Wala na ba talaga nagmamahal sa akin? Minahal mo ba talaga ako ni minsan? So that's an appeal to pity. Next is ad ignorantiam or argument from ignorance. This uses the lack of evidence to prove something or someone else's identity. It is a fallacy in informal logic. Example, you can prove that mermaids aren't real, so it is reasonable to think that they exist. Next is ad populum or appeal to popularity and traditional institution. The argument supports a position by appealing to the shared opinion of a large group of people. Example, kinokondena ng Bible ang mga homosexual. Lahat ng tao tingin sa bakla ay salot sa lipunan. Kaya bakit ayaw mong baguhin yung sarili mo? Magpakalalaki ka naman. Next is ad verecundiam or appeal to authority. Not all appeal to authority is fallacious. Magiging fallacy lang siya if it is the wrong authority that you use as a basis or source of information. Example, sabi ni Duterte dapat daw naka-face shield para hindi mahawa or makahawa ng virus. See? Dapat sa medical authorities. Next is the strawman fallacy. This occurs when you compare something to another, a weaker version of it, then attacking that in an extreme way. Example, wala ka na ba talaga nararamdaman para sa akin? Para ka naman bato, Chad eh. O ako pala yung ginawa mong bato. Bato na napulot mo out of nowhere at itatapon mo sa gilid ng kalsada. Ayan, so next example is red herring. This fallacy is committed when someone diverts attention from the original topic or problem. Example, why can't you get up at maghanap ng trabaho? Ay mommy, alam mo ba yung anak pala ni Aling Marites, buntis daw? O diba, walang connect. Next is false analogy. A type of informal fallacy or a persuasive technique in which the fact that two things are alike in one respect leads to the invalid conclusion that they must be alike in some other respect. Example, alam mo ba si Jessa pala na buntis ni Kanor? Kilala mo yung kapatid. Feeling ko mabubuntis din yun eh. Magkapatid eh. Hawa-hawa yan. Next is the slippery slope fallacy. One insists that a course of action will lead to another and form a chain of reactions. Usually, ang ending niyan is a major unfortunate or bad event. Example, so ano, hold upin mo ako? Sige, hold upin mo ako. Kunin mo lahat. Cellphone ko, wallet ko, bag ko. Lahat kunin mo. Tapos saksakin mo ako. Tapos matatagpuan na lang ako nagdudugong mag-isa. May tatawag ng ambulansya, pero pag nasa ospital na ako, tatawagan nila yung mga mahal ko sa buhay. Pero wala ako nun. Mamamatay na lang ako. Ano, hold upin mo pa ba ako? Yan. So next is the fallacy of complex question. A fallacy in which the answer to a given question presupposes a prior answer to a prior question, aka trick question. So example nito, you are in favor of euthanasia. So, sino gusto mong i-euthanize sa aming pamilya mo? Sagot! Ayan. So, next is the petitio principii or begging the question. This occurs when an argument's premise assumes the truth of the conclusion instead of supporting it. This uses circular reasoning, yung bumabalik lang sa una mong sinabi. Example, everyone wants the new iPhone because it is the hottest new gadget on the market. O, diba? New iPhone, new gadget. Bumalik lang sa dati. So, fallacy of false dilemma. This is a logical fallacy that presents only two options or sides when there are many options or sides in reality. Example, iboboto mo si Bongbong or lahat tayo magdudusa sa kamay ni Lenny for the next 6 years. See? It makes you choose between two things na may agenda na pipiliin mo yung thing na clearly pinaganda nila. And marami talagang options. Next is non sequitur. A non sequitur is a fallacy in which a conclusion does not follow logically from what preceded it. Example, you play guitar right, kaya pala certified plantito ka. Like anong connect? That's an example of a non sequitur. As critical thinkers, we must be aware of these fallacies. It is crucial in arguments because it lets you debunk their logic and recognize their false reasoning.
Module 6, Theory of Appraisal for Simple Arguments. To assess an argument, we either criticize or evaluate it. When we criticize, our goal is to show the weaknesses of the argument. The easiest way to do it is to show that the argument is a fallacy. On the other hand, when we evaluate, we do not only focus on the weaknesses of the argument, but we also demonstrate the strength for us to improve and revise it. In simple empirical arguments, we use empirical generalization as the main premise, and we draw conclusion with probability estimate. Ito ang pinaka-common at pinakamadaling i-construct na argumento. Simple lang din ang structure nito. Kailangan lang ng main premise, minor premise at ng conclusion. For example, generalization. 90% of the students in UPDEP are fully vaccinated. Premise, Christwin, Jochebed, and Angelo are students in UPDEP. Conclusion, therefore, more likely than not, Christwin, Jochebed, and Angelo are fully vaccinated. Para mas madali nating malaman kung alin ang premises at alin ang conclusion, maaari tayong gumamit ng mga indicators. Para sa conclusion, maaari nating gamitin ang mga salitang therefore, hence, consequently, accordingly, so, thus, then, implies, it follows. At para naman sa premises, maaari nating gamitin ang mga salitang because, since, for, in view of the fact, inasmuch as, at as shown by. Since we used empirical generalization in the main premise, the strength of the argument depends on the reliability of the main premise. Para malaman natin kung valid at reliable ba ang generalization na ginamit natin sa main premise, pwede natin gamitin ang 3 tests na natutunan natin sa Module 4. First test, are there enough cases to support a many claim, a most claim, an almost claim, or an all claim? Second, have the observed cases been found in every possible variety of times, places, and circumstances? Lastly, has a thorough search been made for conflicting cases? If the generalization that we will use in the argument passed the 3 tests, then we can confer a high degree of confidence in the support that the main premise can offer to its conclusion. To criticize a simple empirical argument, we must reject the generalization offered. We have to show that the evidence of the generalization is not enough, or that the generalization failed the 3 tests. Another type of empirical argument is inductive argument. Let's analyze this example. Christwin is a UP freshman batch 2021 and he is fully vaccinated. Jochebed is also a UP freshman batch 2021 and she is fully vaccinated. Angelo is also a UP freshman batch 2021 and he is fully vaccinated. All UP freshman batch 2021 that I am acquainted with are fully vaccinated and there is no conflicting cases. Conclusion, therefore, most UP freshman batch 2021 are fully vaccinated. Here are my observations. First, the conclusion used the claim most. Is the evidence for this generalization enough? Of course no, unless you have such records that proves that most of the students are fully vaccinated. Second, look at the premises. Assuming that all of these were true, is it enough to support the claim? Of course, no, because it doesn't even represent the sample to the population, and we do not know the number of students vaccinated and its proportion to the whole population. Therefore, it's not enough to support the claim. Lastly, therefore, can we claim the opposite, that most UP freshmen are not fully vaccinated? Still no, because we don't have enough evidence to prove this claim. How can we improve this argument? We can improve it by modifying the conclusion. The use of claim most is harder to prove because this will require 50% plus 1 evidence. Mas mapapataas natin ang confidence level ng argument na ito kung gagamit tayo ng many claim kaysa sa most claim. The new conclusion should be, therefore, many UP freshman batch 2021 are fully vaccinated. Mas nag-improve ang argument dahil mas tumaas ang confidence level nito at mas madaling suportahan ang many claim dahil mas konting evidence lang ang kailangan nito kumpara sa isang most claim. Another type of argument is analytic argument. It has the same simple structure with empirical arguments, but they have different contents. Kung sa empirical argument ay gumagamit ng empirical generalization sa main premise, sa analytic naman ay gumagamit ng mga analytic statements. Analytic statements could be a definition or a well-formed formula of a formal system. For example, definition: animals with mammary glands are mammals. Premise: whales are mammals. Conclusion: therefore, whales have mammary glands. In analytic arguments, if the definition or the well-formed formula is analytically true and uncontroversial, and if the minor premise is also true, then the truth of the conclusion is proven by the premises. The argument is either proven or not. Unlike in empirical arguments, we can modify the argument by adding evidences to strengthen the claim. But we cannot do the same with analytic statements. It could only be either proven or not, and nothing in between. In analytic arguments, the strength of the argument does not admit to any degrees. The argument is either very good or true, or very bad or false. Nothing in between or in any other degree. We can challenge or criticize an analytic argument by showing that the definition is controversial, or show that the premise is not an instantation or an actual example of the well-formed formula. Let's now proceed with the evaluative arguments. These are arguments with a conclusion which claims that something is good or bad, right or wrong, desirable or undesirable, moral or immoral. Hindi tulad ng mga naunang arguments na tinalakay natin, ang mga premises ng evaluative argument ay hindi necessarily kailangan maging true or false. Karaniwang gumagamit ng mga maxims, moral rule, at moral principle sa major premises nito. Sa isang evaluative argument, nakadepende ang strength ng argument sa public acceptance ng mga nakikinig o ng general public as a whole. If the argument is accepted by the general public, or if the moral principle or moral rule used in the argument is accepted by the general public, the argument will be stronger. So nakadepende ang strength ng argument na ito sa kung gaano tinatanggap ng mga tao yung moral principle na ginamit sa argument. The moral rule or principle in the major premise cannot be falsified because evaluative arguments have no truth value. It is not a measure of truthfulness or falsehood of an argument, but it is about audience acceptability and intersubjective consensus. How can we criticize an evaluative claim? First, we can prove or demonstrate that the moral principle or moral rule used in the major premise does not have strong public acceptance. Second, we can use another moral rule or moral principle that will neutralize the force of the moral rule used in the argument. And lastly, if the argument is teleological, we can demonstrate that the projected consequences of the claim is unlikely to happen. May dalawang klase ng evaluative argument. Ito ay ang deontological argument at teleological argument. The difference between the two are the way how we can criticize them. Para sa deontological argument, Masasabi natin na good or bad ang argument depende sa conformity nito sa moral rule or sa moral principle na ginamit natin. Kung mas align yung moral principle na ginamit natin sa argument, mas masasabi natin na okay yung argument na nagawa natin. Sa kabilang banda naman, sa teleological argument, masasabi natin kung maganda ba o hindi ang isang argument depende sa consequence ng isang claim. To understand more, let's have some examples. For the ontological argument, let us determine the strength of the moral principle used and the argument's conformity with the moral rule. For example, moral rule: never punish an innocent person. Premise: Pedro is accused of a crime, but he is innocent. Conclusion: therefore, Pedro should not be punished. Ngayon, susukatin natin kung gaano nga ba ka-accepted yung moral principle na ginamit natin. Una, sa level ng personal. Second, sa culture or society natin. And lastly, sa culture and society sa ibang lugar sa mundo. First, would you punish an innocent person? Personally, no. Would our society or culture allow the punishment for innocent person? No. Is there any other culture in the world or any other society in the world which would allow punishment for an innocent person? None or no. The strength of the ontological argument or the ontological statement depends on the strength of the moral principle in the major premise. Since we think no one will punish an innocent person, therefore we can accept this argument or claim. We can say that this argument is good. For the teleological argument, since the teleological argument depends on the strength of the consequences of the claim, let us examine the consequences of the claim. For example, definition: the development of human potentials is good. Premise: man has an obligation to develop his human potentials. Conclusion: therefore, any action that promotes the development of human potentials is right, and any action that impedes development is wrong. What are the consequences in this example? First, actions that promote development of human potential is right, because it will lead to improvement. So, good yun, good consequence. The consequences of the act will promote good, therefore it is right. Second, action that impedes development is wrong because it impedes the good from being attained. An action is right if it will lead to good consequence, such as improvement. But if it impedes improvement, therefore it is bad. With that being said, we can say that this argument is good. We can criticize an evaluative claim by proving that the moral rule or principle used in the major premise do not have strong public acceptance. Kung hindi tanggap or hindi generally accepted yung moral rule na ginamit natin, masasabi natin na weakness yon ng isang evaluative argument.
In the history of philosophy, a single argument can demolish a well-entrenched theory or even an entire system of philosophy. When you are able to criticize your composed argument, then you are able to exhibit critical thinking. After the discussions on the previous modules, you now have the prerequisite to compose a complex argument. Alam nyo na yung 3 major types of arguments and their strengths, and alam nyo na rin kung paano i-criticize and evaluate yung bawat types ng argument. So, in this module, I will discuss the step-by-step template for composing an argument. To give you an overview, it includes composing an argument, then criticizing it to compose a counter-argument. Next is the evaluation of both the argument and the counter-argument to determine which one is stronger. I will further discuss these sa mga susunod na slide. The question is, when do we use this template ba? Suppose we formulate a conclusion: most politicians are corrupt. If we can provide an evidence that 50% plus 1 of the total number of politicians in the Philippines is proven to be corrupt, then we don't need to use this template. Pero hindi naman natin alam exactly kung ilang politicians ang meron sa Pilipinas. And the term corrupt is not really defined. So we need to use the template to prove the conclusion. First step sa template is to examine the statement of the conclusion. State your conclusion in simple language, then pay attention and sort out the type of concepts used in your conclusion, for this is important for the rest of the steps in the template. If your conclusion involves evaluative concepts, then you should use evaluative claims as your evidence. Dito, nag-provide ako ng isang sample conclusion. Most politicians are corrupt. The term politicians is empirical, and the term corrupt naman, on the other hand, has a dual meaning. Pwede siyang empirical and pwede rin siyang emotionally loaded evaluative term. Therefore, the sample conclusion, itong most politicians are corrupt, ay isang empirical generalization with an emotionally loaded term. Next is define the terms in the conclusion using an analytic definition. Bibigyan mo lang ng meaning yung mga terms na ginamit mo sa conclusion. Makatutulong ito para magkaroon ng common frame of reference. Then, take note of what is taken as vague or ambiguous terms. Kasi mahihirapan tayong mag-determine ng evidence kung may mga vague or ambiguous terms. Dito sa sample conclusion natin ulit na most politicians are corrupt. According to the standard use of the term, a person is considered a politician if he is running or has run and won any elected position. But paano naman yung mga natalo sa election? Paano yung mga active members ng political party? Politician din ba sila? This makes this term ambiguous and vague. The term corrupt pertains to a politician convicted of a crime in the Sandigan Bayan. Sa Pilipinas, an accused is innocent until proven guilty. So, paano naman yung mga politicians na nahuli, na hindi nahuli and hindi na-convict? Considered as corrupt din ba sila? Then, next is, can there be an agreement in the meaning or use of the term? Or the very definition of the term is biased, hence controversial. Second step is the analysis of the claim of the conclusion. First, classify the conclusion into the type of knowledge claim. Kung sa first step, sinort out natin yung concept, dito i-classify na natin kung anong type of knowledge claim yung conclusion natin. Whether empirical ba, analytic ba, evaluative ba, ganon. Empirical claims are the easiest to identify since it involves any assertion, description, observation about yourself or other people, and observation of the world. Then next, what is the required proof or evidence in order to justify the claim of the conclusion? This is the most critical step. Kailangan masagot mo kung ano bang gustong i-prove ng conclusion mo. Kung hindi mo masagot itong mga questions na ito, then hindi mo mako-compose yung argument. Here we can see how we can challenge each type of the knowledge claims. First, if the conclusion is an empirical generalization, we need to appeal to the required evidence according to the degree of generalization. Kung gaano karami yung need na evidence sa claim of some, many, most, almost all, and all, kailangan mai-provide mo ito. Kagaya rito sa sample conclusion natin na most politicians are corrupt. Empirical generalization ito with the most claim. Therefore, ang required evidence for this is 50% plus 1 of the population. Next, if the conclusion is attempting to establish an evaluative claim, then we must appeal to the strength of the intersubjective consensus or yung public approval to justify the claim. Next, if the conclusion is a legal or a policy proposal, we can appeal to the beneficial consequences para ma-prove ulit yung claim. Lastly, try to determine if the claim of the conclusion is in the realm of the known, knowable, or unknowable. If yung claim mo ay nasa realm of the known and knowable, then provable ito dahil pwede tayong makapag-produce ng evidence in principle. If unknowable naman yung claim mo, unprovable ito. If unprovable, hindi mo na pwedeng ipagpatuloy yung next step sa template na ito since hindi na ito applicable. Third step, finally, we can compose the arguments. You can offer at least 3 and no more than 5 premises that provide the strongest support to the claim of your conclusion. Fourth step, criticize the argument. Dito, kailangan natin gumamit ng critical thinking para i-criticize yung mga arguments na gawa mo or gawa ng ibang tao. The main strategy here is to break the support or at least weaken the support offered by the premises of the conclusion. If naipakita mo na walang support yung premise, then pwede mong masabi na yung argument ay isang fallacy of irrelevant reason. Then, the module provided tactics in criticizing argument. Letter A, scrutinize the conclusion. First, you examine the way the conclusion was written. Then, itanong mo itong questions na ito. Is the statement biased? Is the definition of the key terms neutral, acceptable, or controversial? Is there a need to revise the statement of the conclusion? Sa sample conclusion natin na most politicians are corrupt, we can conclude na there is no need to revise the statement of the conclusion since hindi naman siya biased, but need na i-refine yung terms na politician and corrupt kasi ambiguous and vague nga sila. Then, we examine the claim of the conclusion. For instance, sa empirical generalization, you can challenge it by demanding the required evidence. Ulit na lang tayo dito sa demanding the required evidence. If hindi kasama sa premise set yung required evidence for the generalization, then reject the argument because it committed the fallacy of hasty generalization. Sa sample conclusion ulit na most politicians are corrupt, walang pinoprovide na required evidence sa premise. Hindi ito nagbigay ng data to support the number of corrupt politicians in the Philippines, so the argument has committed the fallacy of hasty generalization. Next, if empirical argument, you can demolish it by confronting the conclusion and proving it to be false or improbable by using counterexamples. For instance, kung ang claim mo is all, pwede mong ma-reject yung conclusion kapag nagbigay ka ng isang counterexample. If yung claim mo naman is most, then you must produce as many counterexamples as you can para ma-disprove mo yung most na claim. Kung kanina, nag-scrutinize tayo ng conclusion, now, is-scrutinize naman natin yung premise set. First, if may duplications dun sa mga premise mo, simply merge the redundant premises into one. Next, classify the assortment of the premises, kung empirical ba, evaluative, or analytic. Sa premise set na ginawa ko, nakagawa ako ng empirical generalization with emotionally charged language. Paano siya naging emotionally charged? Kung maaalala niyo, gumamit ako ng words like legal or illegal means, buy votes, terrorize enemies, murder, solicit. Yung mga words na to, nagpapakita siya ng strong emotion, kaya siya naging emotionally charged language. Next, check if there are inconsistent or contradictory premises. Next, rank the strength of support offered by each premise. So, balikan nyo na lang yung premise set na ginawa ko. Doon sa ginawa ko, premise 1 yung may strongest support sa claim of the conclusion. And yung premise 1, inelaborate niya yung premise 2 and 3. Therefore, premise 1 and 4 yung may strongest support followed by premise 2 and 3. Ganun lang, i-identify nyo lang kung anong premise yung strongest and i-rank nyo lang siya. Determine if lahat ba ng premise ay necessary to prove and support the conclusion. If yes, then determine if sufficient na ba yung premise na yon. If may mga important premise na missing sa premise set, then need pa nating magdagdag. Sa example premise set ko, yung number of convicted politicians ay isang important evidence na wala sa premise set. Kung i-accept natin yung definition ng corrupt as politicians convicted by the Sandigan Bayan, then yung argument natin ay walang empirical evidence na 50% plus 1 of the politicians in the Philippines are proven to be corrupt. Determine if the evaluative or moral premises are supported by strong public approval. Sa case ng sample premise set na ginawa ko, hindi sila evaluative, empirical premises sila. But applicable pa rin sila dito kasi even without evidence, the premises are widely believed and accepted by public perception. Dinademonstrate nito sa Philippine politics, considered na katotohanan or reality yung public perception. Tumatata kasi sa isip ng tao na politicians are corrupt dahil sa nakikita nilang image ng politicians sa mass media. Next, determine if there are empirical generalizations on the premises and challenge them by demanding required evidence. Kaya ulit na tayo dito sa required evidence. Pwede mong i-disprove ang generalization if the observed is not a representative of the whole or if the sample is not large enough, which results sa fallacy of hasty generalization. Yung mga premise na ginawa ko kanina ay multiple generalization na walang scientific data and confirmation for evidence. However, kagaya ulit ng sinabi ko kanina, based naman sila sa public perception ng politicians. So, hindi na kailangan ng evidence. Another tactic is to demonstrate that the observed cases are biased. Ito ay dahil hindi nila na-observe in every possible variety of time, place, and circumstance. Fifth step, compose the counter-argument. After criticizing the arguments, defend the opposite of the original conclusion. Provide at least 3 but no more than 5 premises. Basically, ulitin nyo lang yung step 3 pero based na sa counter-argument yung mga premise set na gagawin nyo. Dito yung conclusion natin is, most politicians are not corrupt. Then yung premise set, basahin nyo na lang siya. You can pause the video to read it para hindi masyadong humaba. Proceed na tayo sa 6th step. Finally, we have reached the 6th step, which involves evaluating both terms. The last step is to determine which of the arguments is stronger, more persuasive, and is likely to be accepted by the target audience, kung yung original ba o yung counter-arguments. After determining which one is stronger, can you strengthen the weaker argument by adding, altering, or modifying premises? Based sa dalawang arguments na ginawa ko kanina, yung original arguments and yung counter-arguments, both sila nag-fail na i-prove ang kanilang conclusion. The original argument was not able to provide the percentage of politicians convicted. On the other hand, yung counter-argument naman, hindi rin siya nakapag-provide ng empirical evidence which support that most politicians are not corrupt. Pareha silang walang empirical evidence na nagsusupport sa empirical generalization na most. Pero kung susuriin natin, mas persuasive pa rin sa target audience yung original argument ko since pwede itong i-accept as truism. Truism meaning obvious truth which does not need any further proof kasi it only needs self-evidence. The public will find the original arguments true even without evidence kasi considered as reality ang perception ng public. Then, we can further strengthen the original arguments by complying to the previous steps. And that concludes our discussion for Unit 4, Modules 5, 6, and 7. Para ma-fully internalize nyo yung mga topics na diniscuss namin, you should continue applying this in your everyday life. Very critical itong mga ito para mas lalo pang ma-develop yung critical thinking natin. And para mas maging aware din tayo sa mga arguments na ginagawa natin and mga arguments na nare-receive natin from others. Yun lamang and thank you!